right. Hello. Welcome to this video. My name is Matt Petrowski, and in this video series, if you've tuned in, we're going to be taking a look at learning FileMaker from the ground up. Now, I'm recording this video live. I actually have people, sometimes we will be going through the chat and answering questions. I'll let you know a little bit more about the format. But our goal here is to learn FileMaker as if we have never opened FileMaker before. And so you're going to see me looking, if you do see me on camera, you're going to see me looking over to the side every once in a while, and that's because I'm working with all of my software in order to coordinate that there. Let me get a little bit of an intro. My name is Matt Petrowski. I know this sounds a little cocky, but if you haven't heard of me, which I'm sure there's plenty of people who haven't heard of me, I've been working with FileMaker for many, many years, going all the way back to 1992. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time telling you everything about me, because this isn't about me. This is about you learning FileMaker. And hopefully the content that I show you and that I reveal will speak for the knowledge that I have with regards to the number of years that I've been working with FileMaker Pro. So what we're talking about this is lesson number 1. And again, I'm going to be recording on pretty much a daily basis, doing the live sessions. We'll have some people that will be in the chat. My intention is to record about a half an hour worth of content and then go through some answers and questions if we want to. Those will be recorded as well in the 15 minutes. There will be freely available content, which is what you're accessing right now. And then there may be some content that is off screen or behind a paywall. That just really depends on how I feel about this course and how it's proceeding. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what I wish somebody had told me when I first started with FileMaker. Now what we have is, I'm going to switch over to FileMaker. You can follow along in this series. In fact, if you're catching this video at any point in time while the series is actually going, if you would like to be notified of when I'm going to do videos. Now, for the most part, it'll be on a daily basis at pretty much the same time. But let me switch over to Safari here, and I think that opened up. I might have a window over here. If not, we'll just bring it on screen. And we'll open up the magazine site. So as of the recording of this video, if you go to my website of FileMakerMagazine.com, I'll zoom in for you here. If you end up at my website, then it's very likely that you may see this graphic right here on screen where it says the Scriptology Mastery Course. If you click on that, you'll be able to add your name to a notification list, and I will notify you when I'm going to shoot videos if the videos are not at the same time every day. And that way you'll be notified when you're going to be able to participate in the live chat. I think that's all I have so far with regards to the introduction. We can now jump into the content because that's what you have come for. So FileMaker from the ground up, as if FileMaker has never been opened before. Of course, this isn't what you would see on screen when I have FileMaker here. You would probably have the initial dialog that would come up, and FileMaker would give you a presentation to walk through a little bit of a tour. I'm going to assume that you've already gone through that and dismissed it. We are either working on a solution that already exists, or we're working on our own new solution. So the first place that I always go to any new copy of FileMaker is into the preferences, and it's worthwhile to actually take a look at these. On Windows, you'll find that option under I believe the file menu or the edit down at the bottom. I am recording this on a Macintosh, but it doesn't mean that I won't show things that are on Windows as well. So we're taking a look at FileMaker's environment, and like any type of situation, if you know nothing about a tool, one of the most confusing things is all of the different ways that you can use the tool. And in FileMaker, it's very easy to get confused, at least these days, because it's not as simple of a program as it used to be. So it always benefits you to know all of the things about the environment. So before we even get into developing a database, we are going to become familiar with the environment so that we know where to go when we want to do certain things when we are creating in FileMaker. So as I zoom in here, and let me zoom out just a little bit more, we're taking a look at our preferences, and we want to set FileMaker up so that it's comfortable for us to work. Now, some of these settings may be particular to me. Some of them maybe you haven't used before. Drag and drop, it's a pretty obvious one right there that you probably want to use. Show recently opened files. If you're in your preferences and you have not checked this or you have not increased this, I think FileMaker may start out with something like 9. I like to bump this up to as high as possible. Oftentimes I'll hit 50. FileMaker will tell me that I can only go up to 30, and that's really good. It's really nice when you're working with a lot of demo files and you don't want to have to remember those demo files, because you can always go up to the File menu, choose this Recent menu option, and then it'll show you everything that you've most recently opened, and it's very easy to go right to those files. Yes, we do want to use Manage. This is not something that you have to use, the Use Manage Database dialog to create files, but it's just an option that you can when you're in that area, and we'll see the Manage Database. It's one of the primary areas that you're in when you are defining what data you're going to store in FileMaker. Reset dialog boxes, that'll just basically reset them from where they were positioned and what they were selected. Username, this is coming from the system, and FileMaker changed this in some versions a way back, but one of the nice things to know is that there's this other option right here, and if you ever want to do things with FileMaker, there is a function in FileMaker that is this right here, get username. Now that function, when you use it, what's returned is anything from this area right here. So if the default of the system name is not selected, and if you're in a corporate environment or if you're in any type of situation where you are going to tell the users, hey, why don't you set your username to whatever you want. Now typically this can be something like building 5 or Office 3. It really is up to you, because the username is not something that's specific to what happens when a user logs in. That changed a long time ago. This is a holdover, and FileMaker is actually a program full of a lot of holdovers. They sort of keep moving all of the things that they had going all the way back to the early and mid 90s, and they still have it in FileMaker. And sometimes these things become obsolete, sometimes they become somewhat useful. So if you know that this is where you can get a return value from get username, that's something that you can do in order to use that creatively. Of course, that is something the user could come into the preferences and change, but it is something that can be set by an administrator when FileMaker is installed. As we'll see down the road, the name that a user actually uses or that is returned when they log in is get account name. So that's a little bit different than get username, which is our holdover. So nice little tip right there. Application, you can notify me when an update is available, notify me when a new version is available. Sure, go ahead and keep those checked. Under layout, there are some options, and these are good to know about because when we're working in our layout mode, which as we're going to see is where we design how things look, there's this option right here to always lock layout tools. Now I'll give you a little tip before we even get to layout mode. You can check this if you want to, but it's not absolutely necessary, because what you're able to do is on any layout tool, when we're working in FileMaker's layout mode, we can double click that tool and it will actually perform the same thing. It'll do a temporary lock instead of a permanent lock. This right here, having this checked, means that when you select a particular tool, let's say a rectangle tool, it will be always locked to a rectangle tool until you made a selection of another tool. Whereas the default is FileMaker, after you select one of its layout tools, it will default and switch back to the arrow tool or the selection tool. Now, this one isn't a pain and annoyance. Add newly defined fields to the current layout. If that is checked on your copy of FileMaker, I always considered it a little bit painful that when you add a new field to your database, FileMaker just sort of makes this assumption, hey, you probably want this on your layout, and that's not always the case. So having that unchecked is going to be a little bit more beneficial when we're developing our FileMaker systems. Save layout changes automatically. This is a personal preference one. If you do not like to be asked, because you know that when you change something in your layout and then you go into browse mode, these are the different modes which we're going to be learning about with FileMaker. This one will actually just do it automatically. Now, this is probably unchecked, but on mine, I like to check it. Reason being is FileMaker used to not support having an undo option when you would go between two of FileMaker's modes. That's layout mode and browse mode. However, it does now have that option. So let's say you're designing your view. You make your changes. You go into browse mode to look at it, see how it's going to work. You come back into layout mode. You formerly did not have the option to have undos, but in FileMaker 16, and it may even be in 15 and later, then you do have the ability to revert any of those layout changes. FileMaker remembers those. Memory. This is a good one to know about because it deals with the cache. Now, the cache, if you're unfamiliar, if you never worked with a database product or a product where there is a cache, I always think about it this way. The cache is just like a bowl of fruit. If you put a bowl of fruit on a table as you're walking through, let's say, your kitchen, it's much easier to stick your hand out, grab that apple from that bowl of fruit, and not have to actually go into a location to get the fruit, as opposed to, let's say, sticking the bowl in a cupboard or sticking it in the refrigerator. With the refrigerator, if the refrigerator represents your hard drive, you have to go to the refrigerator, open the refrigerator, then grab the fruit. So the cache is just more readily available, but there's a finite amount. So you can actually increase or decrease this. You can see that the current size is 2000, default cache is 128. The more cache you give FileMaker, and this applies to server and to client, but here on the client, what it's saying is saying this copy of FileMaker, when it downloads, let's say 10 layouts, it's going to store all of those 10 layouts. If I had set this to a much smaller number, like 128 megabytes, let's say out of those 10 layouts, it was only going to grab 1, 2, or 3 of them. And what happens is as the cache gets full, whatever needs to come in that's new, it replaces the stuff that's old. So the older stuff gets kicked out. So sometimes you'd think that the higher number, the better, but that's sometimes not the case. Depending on the system, sometimes it benefits you to have a little bit of a smaller cache, and you're able to make things refresh a little bit quicker. It really depends on the system. You're going to find out in FileMaker development, there are so many things that really depend specifically on the use case. If you are a beginner, then I really want you to focus on this one topic. There is no one absolute way to do things in FileMaker. The key word within development is almost always it depends. Here you have the save cache contents where you've got during idle time or every 10 minutes. Now the default of during idle time means that it's just going to happen whenever FileMaker is not doing something else. And there's a lot of times where FileMaker is not doing anything else, either not running a script, the user's left the computer, etc. There are very few instances where you might want to change this to doing a timed cache, meaning I want to time when the cache actually is saved. But there are times when you want to do that, and that's probably beyond the scope of this video. Now, next up we have is an important one. In fact, I cannot believe, and I am constantly surprised, that's probably saying the same thing, at how many FileMaker developers things get installed into FileMaker with regards to plugins, and they simply don't know where those things are installed. Plugins is a key area here that we must know about if we're going to be any type of developer in FileMaker. You can see that I have a number of plugins installed, but we're going to briefly go through where these are actually stored. Now, it used to be a very hidden way to get to FileMaker plugins. There are specific locations, and in every environment, there's typically an order in which FileMaker will search for where it will load things. And it applies to plugins as much as it does applies to connecting to other files, as we will see when we have multiple FileMaker files. So first off, let's talk about this. Allow solutions to install files. Now, you could look at this as being a little bit dangerous. And a lot of the times, from a security standpoint, you do want to come in here and check this, because you uncheck this. You don't want to arbitrarily allow any other FileMaker file to just arbitrarily install plugins, because those plugins can do devious things behind the scenes. Now, I don't want you to be afraid as a new FileMaker user, but I do want you to be aware that plugins enhance and extend FileMaker's capabilities. In fact, quite significantly. I'm a big fan of plugins. But these plugins, if they can be installed by just any old FileMaker file that you open, you could open a malicious FileMaker file that installs a plugin and then, I don't know, transfer your contacts or something. As a developer, you need to be aware of that. But typically, there's not too much of a problem. So I like to come in here, and when I'm going to install a plugin in FileMaker, and you can do it either manually or you can do it a FileMaker way, and we'll take a look at that in this series, but not today. I will temporarily select this to allow solutions to install files, install the plugin, and then come back and uncheck this option. Now, in FileMaker 16 and higher, it may be in 15, I don't know, I can't remember, this button does not exist in versions prior to 16, or if it is 15. This is a very good button to have, because the FileMaker plugin folder, or where FileMaker installs plugins, were pretty much hidden. So if we click this, what we're going to get is we're going to get a window that's going to come up, and here on the Macintosh, we can see that it's in a folder called Extensions. Now, this folder name is not unique. In fact, the extensions folder, as it's named, it shows up in multiple locations, and there is a search order in which FileMaker actually looks for plugins. And we have to know this because if a plugin accidentally gets installed from something that we go download about FileMaker and we can't find it, then we really don't know what we're doing and we're frustrated. So you can see right here that my copy of FileMaker is actually showing 1, 2, however many plugins are here. I clicked the Reveal Plugin folder, but yet the plugin folder, behold, is empty. So the trick here is these multiple locations. When you're going to work within FileMaker, you need to know that these multiple locations where you can load things allow you to treat the environment differently. If you are a professional FileMaker developer, then you may be running multiple copies of FileMaker. That means, let's say, 14, 15, and 16, because sometimes you're developing for other clients and they may have a copy of 15, whereas a newer client may have a copy of FileMaker 16 or later. So our goal is to put plugins where they make the most sense for our development. If we manually install, then that's basically we go to a website, we drag the plugin into the extensions folder where we want that plugin to load, or for which version. So what I'm going to do here is on the Macintosh, I'm going to hold down the Command key while I select the actual item right here. And on Windows, you can actually hit the Delete key and it'll go up the chain of folders. And we can see right here, this is the important thing we want to be aware of. This is my user folder right here. And then it goes to a hidden library folder, which isn't a visible folder when you're looking at, if I was to switch to this folder of Mac, I would not see library. The Macintosh operating system hides it. And I forget if it's hidden on Windows or not, but it will show you as you go up the chain, the folders, or when you click in the URL bar on Windows, it'll show you all of the embedded folders. Application support is where all applications, or not all, but most of the applications on your computer store things. FileMaker is FileMaker's own folder. And then we have, in this case, FileMaker Pro Advanced. Yours may just say FileMaker Pro if you do not have a copy of FileMaker Advanced. Then we have a version of the actual FileMaker that you're using. In this case, I'm using FileMaker 16. So I'm going to switch just to this folder of FileMaker within Application Support. And as I switch there, what I want you to make note of is this folder called extensions. Now we were within a folder called extensions, and I'm going to reveal that right now. And it is right there. So here's the difference of where plugins can actually be stored. FileMaker can store plugins in a version-specific extensions folder. And that's exactly where FileMaker will try to install them if you use FileMaker's option, which we'll take a look at later in this series. Installing a plugin from a container field, which is a field that will store a plugin in FileMaker, it will go into this extensions folder. But if you're developing with FileMaker and you are using multiple versions, as I mentioned, 14, 15, and 16, then instead of putting them in the version-specific folder, you can create a folder outside of the FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Pro Advanced folder and put the extensions there. Now what this folder does is it means that FileMaker is going to, no matter what version you load, is going to look at this folder first. So if I was to open FileMaker 14 or 16 or 15, then these extensions will load no matter what the version. Whereas here, the only extensions that will load here are for version 16 and 14 and what have you. Now there's one other location that you need to be aware of with regards to extensions. And that is, as I bring up FileMaker itself, let me show that. So I've jumped into the folder where the actual FileMaker application is. In fact, let's make this a little bit easier to see here, and I'll zoom in again. So here's the FileMaker Pro application. The last place I believe the extensions are looked for is here in the actual folder called extensions right next to the application. Now, I never suggest any developers put any of their extensions here because those extensions can go away if you reinstall the FileMaker Pro application or delete this particular folder. In my opinion, the two best places are either in the global extensions right here, which will load for any version, or the version-specific extensions. Why do you need to know this as a beginning or advanced or a beginning or intermediate developer? Because there are times where you only want to run certain plugins for certain versions of FileMaker, but yet there are plugins that you want to run and make sure that they run for whatever versions you have. As a beginner, I'm going to assume that you're only working with one copy of FileMaker currently, but now you have the knowledge, and down the road, if it's the case that you do end up running multiple copies of FileMaker, that's exactly what you need to know about the extensions. So we also have this configure right here, which basically configure, you can see as I clicked on this particular configure, this configure is where you can set the settings for each of the plugins, and it really depends on the plugin that you have selected. When you have a plugin selected and you click on configure, this is the option or the dialog box that will come up if the plugin developer does provide that feature of where you can put in things like a registration code. You can see that I've got an unregistered version currently here of the 360works Script Master. You basically just select the plugin. If it's not provided, there will be no configure. There may be version information. It's where you can find out the version of the plugin. Each of the plugins will probably have their own plugin version built in, but many times they're here as well. So finally, in preferences, we have the permitted hosts. Now, the permitted host is something that was added in FileMaker 16. So if you're in a version earlier than FileMaker 16, you will not have a permitted hosts tab. And the permitted hosts is basically just an additional layer of security that on this copy of FileMaker, you are saying what remote copies of FileMaker or what remote databases can this copy of FileMaker actually connect to. And most of the time, you're going to want to have an encrypted versus an unencrypted connection. Now mine is saying unencrypted here because this is actually a connection to a local FileMaker server on my own computer. And that's because I develop locally. So don't let this confuse you. What you may have is you may have a list of a number of connections for all of the different FileMaker servers that you have actually connected to. If there's a server that you don't trust, you can click Clear All to get rid of all of these. Don't worry, because the next time you connect to that, it will ask you, or it may not ask you, it will actually put the connection of a permitted host in here and tell you whether it's encrypted or not. All right. So we are 24 minutes in. I'll just spend a little bit more time going through what you need to know about FileMaker. And it's one of the fundamentals that I started with going all the way back to when I initially started writing a book called Scriptology, hence the name of this course. It's one of the key things that you need to know as a new FileMaker developer. And it's something that nobody really told to me that sort of gave me a big aha moment. When you select up here in the menu system, I want you to remember that FileMaker as a development environment is nothing more than basically an automation tool for everything that you can find in the menus. And that's really, as far as I'm concerned, that's really what FileMaker is. But when we combine the two of automation and system, you develop the system within FileMaker, but everything that a user would do manually is something that you can automate. So for example, let's open up a new solution if you'd like to. Let's go to Get Started, actually. If you've got the Get Started menu, let's open up the Get Started. It will bring up the menu that you initially see with FileMaker. Choose a starter solution. Need to turn that off. There we go. Scroll down. We can choose any one of these. In fact, it's good to know if you ever want to start with FileMaker Starter Solutions. This initial dialog that FileMaker 16 will show you, it shows some initial solutions of like contacts, inventory, etc. But there are more solutions than just the ones that they actually show you. You can see right here, once you get down to the bottom, they have this Explore the Possibilities. Now this is as of this recording of FileMaker 16. If you see Advanced Solutions, it's going to bring up a different dialog. This is the dialog that FileMaker had in FileMaker 15 and 14, I believe, where you have more options as starter templates than just the 4 that FileMaker lists. And they sort of hid that by having to scroll here. But you can pick any one of these. I'm just going to pick assets here and click to choose that one. It'll ask me where to put that. I'm going to go to my desktop and I'll go ahead and save that assets. You can follow along. Now I'm probably not going to be wrong that you've already worked with or opened a FileMaker database. You know that you can look in here and find out all kinds of things, and they're designed different ways. But when I say that FileMaker is nothing more than an automation system for its menus, this is what I'm talking about. If I want to find all assets that are good assets, what I'm going to do is, well, I did it a little bit fast right there, but I'm going to do this in slow motion here. I'm going to go to one of FileMaker's modes, which we're going to take a look at, which is this one right here, Find mode. It's Command F. That takes me into the mode where I'm going to find, and I'm going to put the word good, and then I'm going to say I want to actually perform that find by clicking this little button right here. Now, everything that I did, as I'm explaining, that's the manual process of what I would have had to do. That whole process can be scripted in FileMaker. Now, you may already know that, and maybe you didn't, but that's the key point of FileMaker. Anything, or most everything, that you find in the menus is available within FileMaker's scripting system. So if I didn't want to have a user to be able to take the time to find all the good items, let's say I wanted to have a row of buttons up here that represented the good versus all of the other options, I'm simply going to automate that process with the user goes into find, step 1. The user inputs good. The user performs the find. And in fact, those are the 3 exact steps that you would actually make in a FileMaker script. So we will be doing that throughout the course of this video. And as long as you remember that key fundamental, it'll probably become a lot easier, and you won't treat the environment as this abstract thing that's so hard. It's more of, how do I find out what are the steps, or what did FileMaker call it to make it do what I want it to do? Whether it's finding things, whether it's creating things, deleting things, you name it. So in the next video, what we're going to be going through is we're going to be going through the rest of the environment. And most of that is going to be found here under the File menu. So it's the File menu, and then it's Manage. And we're going to go through Database. We won't go in the order that they're actually presented. And I also have to let you know that my keys that I have set here, you will not have matching keys on your copy of FileMaker. I have enhanced my copy of FileMaker, and I've done that through the operating system. So if you are interested, let's take a very quick little sidebar and go see that. Unfortunately, it's only on the Macintosh. On Windows, you do have the ability to have those hotkeys that you can use, but on the Macintosh here, let me open up my preferences, and I'll need to bring those on screen. On the Macintosh, when you open your system preferences, there is an area right here called Keyboard. And when you select on the keyboard, you can click on this option called Shortcuts. After you click Shortcuts, you can click on App Shortcuts. And while mine isn't showing right here, that's because I've recently installed my new operating system. It should show right here that there would be a FileMaker Pro application. In fact, I would click the plus sign, I would select on all applications, I would scroll this list all the way down. FileMaker does not list itself in here, and if you're wondering why, one of the key things to note is that FileMaker, because it's a cross-platform application, it doesn't tie into a lot of the things that are specific to an operating system. So for example, on the Mac, the FileMaker application doesn't list right here because FileMaker has to write their own code so that it's a cross-platform application. I'll show you another way that you can actually recognize that. But you have to scroll down to the very bottom of this list, and then you would find this other option right here. And then you can add FileMaker in order to be able to assign it keyboard shortcuts in order to access things quickly. Here's the example that I'm talking about with regards to how you can tell that FileMaker is not actually, it doesn't tie into native aspects of the environment. So I've just created a text edit file right here, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. On the Macintosh, and I don't know if this is the case on Windows, but on the Macintosh, if you didn't know this, this is a nice little thing. Notice what I did when I was selecting on the title bar of being able to show where those plugins are on in the Finder. Here I've created just a standard text document, and I can select with the Command key down. So when I hold the Command key, it will tell me in reverse order where this file actually is in the hierarchy of my computer system. FileMaker doesn't do that. Here's the FileMaker window. I hold down the Command key and I select on Assets. It just doesn't work. So FileMaker's not tying into the native or the native operating system with regards to this window. It is to some extent, but because it doesn't have that feature, I know that FileMaker is doing some things a little bit differently, and that's because of its cross-platform nature. So just another key little thing to know about in terms of FileMaker and why it doesn't show up in those keyboard shortcuts. But that was the little sidebar right there. Back under the Manage, we are going to be going over the database, security, value list, layouts. We're going to talk about all of these different aspects of the environment before we even start to get to developing a database. Now, when we do get to developing a database, you will be able to jump to those videos or jump around as you see fit. We will also be going through, as I go into layout mode, all of these different palettes, which can be somewhat scary. FileMaker has a lot of them. We've got Inspector, we've got Field Picker, we've got Layout Objects, and we need to know how all of these relate to what it is that we're going to be developing and working on. So I'm going to leave this video at that point. We're at 30 minutes in on this video. You are going to be able to follow along, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the chat now, and I'm going to bring that on screen as I switch here. And let me bring the chat on screen and so that I can see what questions you're asking, if you have any questions. If we don't have any questions, then we'll be able to wrap this video up, and I will be able to see you on the next video. Let's see, we've got we've got about 20 people here. Did anyone have any questions with regards to the preferences and setting up our initial environment? Anything that I explained so far in terms of how it impacts your FileMaker development? If not, I've got one question right there. How to do that in Windows? So Ahmed, do you know where I was with regards to what you were asking about? How to do what in Windows? Finding the plugins or being able to look at the hierarchy? Unless Ahmed has left. If so, then we don't have a follow-up to that. And looks like we don't. Not as of yet. All right. So I think, without any responses to those questions or follow-ups, the corresponding folder to libraries are hidden in Windows. Magnus mentions that. Also, a good thing about being on the live stream with the chat is you will have other people that will be answering your questions as I'm going through the content. In Windows, you can go through the hierarchy. You just need to, once you get to the folder, once you reveal it, it will tell you where that is. So unfortunately, I don't have my Windows open. I'll remember to open that up next time and have that so that we can explore on Windows as well where the hierarchies are, or show where things are in the folder system. Hermund is saying Scriptology was FileMaker 3. It was for 3, 4, and 5. So a long time ago. But it was very comprehensive, but it took a very specific approach in terms of expressing fundamentals and tying in techniques to those fundamentals so that you could have a hands-on application of what was actually being learning. Will the class be using 16? Yes, I will be using 16 moving forward. The one version, 15, is close enough to 16 that you're really not missing too much in terms of what 16 added in terms of developing. Although 16 did add one major feature, which is the layout objects panel. So that would be the one thing that's the major thing that you're missing. Otherwise, the rest of the things from a developer standpoint are just pretty minor things, like a sort function and some JSON functions, things that we really won't get into with regards to being a beginner. The custom function, Ahmed actually mentions. Not exactly clear what you're asking on the custom function, but I think we'll be able to address that. One thing, again, I'd like to mention, let's switch over to the desktop for anyone who would like to join in. Let's open up a window here. Again, if you want to be notified so that you can be on the chat when these videos are happening, as of the recording of this video, you can go to this link right here. Otherwise, if this course has already passed and these videos, you're watching them in the past, while their information is still valid, you can always come to the training tab or just come to the website in general and be able to access any of the content that we have here on the website. So I think, since I don't have too many perplexing questions, I've enjoyed the first stream. Looking forward to the next one. Thank you, Jeffrey. And yes, the plan is for me to basically every day for a half an hour or so, I'm happy to go over a little bit, show up, and you can pick up some more about FileMaker. I'm just going to be basically doing a brain dump, explaining every single thing that I know about FileMaker. And so I think that's going to bring this to a close. If you would like to be reminded of these videos, if you'd like to be notified, then towards the end of this video, if you just hang on just a little bit, there's going to be a subscribe that's going to come up. It'll show up on screen. It'll be the little ISO logo, and there's going to be a link to other videos if you want to see those as well. I'm more than happy to notify you of what I'm teaching when I'm teaching it, and of course you can access the magazine site and go grab those videos. So I think that's going to bring this video to a close, and I hope that you've enjoyed the content, and until the next video, see you around.